Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and start. I know more attendees are being added, so I'll launch into our intro as more of you join. Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday afternoon. If you're like me, you lose track of your days during COVID, so it's Thursday afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Adam Klein. I'm the Chief Strategist at the American Underground. We're a tech hub and startup ecosystem centered in downtown Durham. And excited to be bringing this next Luminary Talk to you in partnership with our friends at HQ Raleigh, the Entrepreneurship Center at Kenan-Flagler at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as our partners at Duke University, North Carolina Central University, and North Carolina State University. For those of you who were on last month, we hosted Alan Klein, no relation to me, for a great talk, our first in this series of Luminary Talks. And just as a bit of background, the Luminary Talks series came about through some conversations between the partner groups that I just mentioned. Obviously, all of us are in pretty uncertain times and trying to navigate what the future holds. And our thinking was that we do that best in community, and we do that best as a region. And we're fortunate to have such incredible partners across the triangle and an incredible startup ecosystem here that, though we can't be together in person, much as I think we all would like, we wanted to still take this opportunity to navigate COVID together and to understand what this means for our businesses and the decisions that we're making collectively. And one of the beauties of this time is our ability to access luminaries, people who are remarkable in their profession, in their impact on the startup community. And I'm really proud to be doing that today with Mary Grove, who I count as a friend and a mentor of sorts. And so I'll introduce her in just a minute, but that's a bit about us and why we're doing this. And again, I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to join us for this. We are recording this, so we'll share it afterwards. Special thanks again to the Entrepreneurship Center at Kenan-Flagler for their tech expertise on this as well. For those of you who are on, and I see more attendees are rolling in as the last few minutes have gone by, I'm going to open it up for your questions at about 2:10. So I've got some questions that Mary and I are going to walk through to get the conversation going. But please enter your questions in the chat that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. Gary Lyon, who I should have introduced at the beginning, is my colleague at American Underground. He is co-hosting this with me and will be watching the chat and moderating those questions a little bit later today. We'll be off around 2:30 and let you get back to your afternoon. So with that, Mary Grove, welcome. Glad to have you on. Let me tell everybody a little bit about you. Mary is managing partner of Bread and Butter Ventures. She brings nearly 2 decades of leadership experience in technology, early stage investing, and startup ecosystem growth. She began her career working on the Google IPO and went on to lead new business development partnerships, negotiating early stage product and technology deals across the world. She then served as the founding director of Google for Startups, leading the company's global efforts to support entrepreneurs in over 100 countries. That's actually where Mary and I first met each other. American Underground's fortunate to be one of the partners with Google for Startups, and have gotten to know Mary through that. She's actually helped us open our Raleigh location. Let's see, that would have been 2014. So she's pretty familiar with the triangle. So she spent 15 years at Google and worked as an investment partner, most recently at Revolution's Rise of the Rest seed fund, where she led dozens of investments in a range of sectors, including healthcare, enterprise software, and fintech. She also built the fund's portfolio support platform and built a network of over 150 mentors and partners to guide startup growth. She is co-founder and executive director of Silicon North Stars, a nonprofit that she and her husband, Steve, founded in 2013 to help young Minnesotans from underserved communities pursue careers in tech. She's a Stanford alumni and has 3-year-old twins, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. Mary's bread and butter is helping organizations build teams and infrastructure to operate at scale, building partnerships, and home-cooked Thai recipes. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much, Adam, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be back with the Triangle community today.
It's good to have you here. So I alluded to this a little bit in the introduction in introducing you and talking about Minnesota. So, you started your career in the Bay at Google, working on the IPO, and now you're in Minneapolis. So I'd love to hear, why the move, and you are familiar with you worked with Steve Case and the Rise of the Rest team about flyover states and places like Minnesota and North Carolina. I'd love to just hear you talk about being back in Minneapolis.
Absolutely. So it's been a fascinating journey the last few years. And just to give a bit more background on myself. So my first sort of lens of entrepreneurship was through my family. My parents are immigrants from Thailand who grew up in, rural villages without electricity. And to me, they represented that quintessential American dream of they met here, raised a family here, built and ran small businesses together for over 30 years. And so that experience of watching their successes, their failures, the grit and tenacity really gave me such a deep appreciation. And I think I was always drawn from an early age to this idea that, you could mobilize and you could sort of create a reality from scratch. And so I grew up, I'm from Iowa. I was born in Iowa, but I grew up in Southern California, then went to school in the Bay Area, ended up, accidentally stumbled into tech, which was a phenomenal 15-year chapter that I feel so privileged to have had. And as part of that, I met my husband, Steve, at Google. We both were there for over a decade each. And we had this really great community and environment in the Bay Area. I love the Bay Area, and Silicon Valley is a very special place. There's a lot that I take from it every day in my work today. And yet, through my work with Google for Startups, I saw firsthand our work was very global. We worked in about 130 countries. We worked within the US and these rising, thriving cities all outside of Silicon Valley as well. And so our move was really motivated by this belief that, where is the future of the innovation economy going to be written? And is that in Silicon Valley, or is it in places like Durham, Raleigh, Minneapolis, Madison, you name it. And so we took a sharp right turn in our lives, both personally and professionally, and we moved to Minneapolis back in 2018. And so, why Minneapolis? Partially, we wanted to land in the Midwest somewhere. My husband is a super proud Minnesotan. We've got the 75-person family that you see in movies for family reunions. And so both professionally, the opportunity to be on the ground in these markets and give it a real shot. And also on a personal level, the opportunity to raise our young family as part of this community and part of the broader family fabric. So when we moved, I had 1-year-old twins who are now 3.5. And so I would say, it's worked out really well. There's been a lot of twists and turns, and it's been very fulfilling, rewarding, and it's been a big adjustment.
Yeah, awesome. Just talking to you a little bit about sort of the professional journey on this, I'd love to hear what's your favorite thing about being an investor?
Gosh, I love all facets of it. I think it's such a intellectually curious business, and we work across so many industries, right? So in any given day, I'm looking at opportunities in affordable housing and prop tech to, a female health company focused on maternal health to an enterprise software tool focused on, greater connectivity within an organization. And it really does stretch your mind. And it's very humbling too, right? We work on building our bench of experts and mentors who we can go to too for these deep dive industry expertise insights, because, one can only know so much in a given day. And so, but by and large, my favorite part is supporting and working with founders post-investment in their teams and in the trenches. And that speaks to, both the good times, but also the bad and even more so the ugly times. And so I always think about it as it's such a relationship. It's a two-way street. And for entrepreneurs, the decision of who you choose to take capital from and who you want to be on your team in the trenches with you, who do you want to be calling on a Sunday night at 11 p.m. when something's blowing up, and who do you want as your partner? And so that's to me the biggest, it's such an honor and a privilege and really a joy.
Well, and it's exciting to see that you've launched a new fund. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit, transitioning from evolution to now bread and butter. Why bread and butter?
Yeah, so it's been an exciting last month or so. So late June, we announced formally the unveiling of Bread and Butter Ventures. And as a sort of evolution, right? Moving from Silicon Valley to Minnesota and being able to be a part of a platform like Rise the Rest, it taught me that I deeply love the work of early stage, and I love the work of investing, in particular, the work that comes after with working with the companies. But I also, it was kind of a life experiment, this move to Minnesota. And a couple of years in, we made a very intentional decision that we want to go deep and long, and our commitment is for the long haul here. And so as part of that, being able to create an opportunity to invest from and in the community I'm a part of, not to invest exclusively in Minnesota, but to really be rooted in this place-based strategy. And so Bread and Butter Ventures we're an early stage seed fund based here in Minnesota, and we invest globally, but specifically in the sectors that map to the backbone of Minnesota's economy, or what we think of as, the bread and butter states, one of our state's nicknames. But what's the bread and butter of the modern economy moving forward? And we believe that's three sectors. So food tech and ag tech, which is broadly, how do we think about feeding ourselves? Everything from in the ground ag, through supply chain manufacturing, through delivery to the end consumer. Health tech is the second large vertical, and then enterprise software being the third. And so, we can and do and will look broadly across sectors, but those three we consider our bread and butter. My partner, Brett Brohl, is a globally renowned expert in food tech and ag tech. And we both have worked a lot in enterprise software, and I have led a number of healthcare investments. And so the confluence of our personal investment expertise, but also, I think in a very compelling way, trying to organize and formally mobilize the backbone infrastructure that Minnesota has. And so, for example, we are home to five of the five largest food companies in the world are headquartered here. From a health tech perspective, we have, whether it's United Health Group or Mayo Clinic, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Allina Health. On the enterprise side, we're home to the largest number of Fortune 500s per capita in the country at 16. We have relationships with all of the top Fortune 50 companies here. And so being able to leverage that to build connective tissue for the startups to access, mentorship, industry insights, commercial pilots, commercial deals. Ultimately, we hope long-term a path to M&A too.
Awesome. That's great. That was part of my question there, was about sort of what you see as your unique advantages or opportunities. And I love how you sort of laid that out, and the fact that it's connected with where you are, which is something I want to talk a little bit more about later, and how you're kind of weaving professional and personal life together. On that front, so I mentioned this in the introduction, but you've worked at Revolution and Google for Startups. You've been a big supporter of the Triangle region. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this region and things that stand out to you about the Research Triangle.
The Research Triangle it's a really special place, and I'm glad that we can do this virtually in this time, but I'm eager to be back on the ground when I can. I think my relationship and exposure with the Research Triangle started through Google for Startups. When American Underground, when we were first introduced, it was probably 2012, and we partnered in 2013. So it's been a joy to kind of watch the ecosystem continue to flourish and really become known nationally. And so many of the attributes that I look at when I think about what makes a startup ecosystem thrive are embodied there in the Research Triangle. And that's, one is talent, and a density of talent of all types. And that, of course, having a strong university base there certainly provides that. So the talent piece is critical. The community aspect and feel, and that's been apparent to me for a very long time, but the idea that we can really support each other and amplify each other and come together in physical spaces and co-working spaces, even at the forefront of that movement and that community feel, to me is palpable. And the other big thing is we look at cities, we look at quality of life, and can we attract and retain talent there? And can we grow great companies, not just to get them started, but to help them scale through all stages? And so I think across those vectors, you really do shine. And it's please know that outside of your own region, people are paying attention.
Great. Good. Thank you. So I wanted to shift to some questions around COVID, and also a topic that I know is really important to you, and you and I have spent time talking about this, around diversity and inclusion. So let me start with the COVID questions. I'm curious, just personally, professionally, how has it impacted you? What's sort of your normal work day these days?
I don't think there's anything normal
Yeah.
about any days, but these days, right? But the confluence of having just kicked off something new too, which is it's a super fun stage to be. But the days they're a blend. So right now, I would say balancing being a mom to toddlers with starting a new fund and all the other great things that I get to work on every day. But it's a mix. I was just laughing this morning that I was literally doing 5 unrelated things at the same time while trying to get my kids ready and get them out the door to their Montessori program. And I thought I need to just try to slow down and very intentionally just be more present and be more organized, because I'm pretty good at multitasking, but if there's no sort of proactive plan behind it, it can scatter. But
Right.
right now, I wake up super early and I start emails around 6, just try to get some things cleared out while the house is quiet. And then I'm with my kids, get them up, get ready, get a little time with them in the morning. They're off to their Montessori program at 9, and then I'm scrambling to fit in as much as I can. And right now, the day ends for me. That part of the day ends at 3, so as much as I can get in between basically 9:30 and 3.
Right.
And then I right now get this. It's actually a real privilege of this time, but I get this extended chunk with my kids after their school program, basically until they go to bed, and then back at it from 8:30 until 11, maybe midnight. And it's just this blending of the, we talk about work-life balance or the professional and personal. And I think one thing that I appreciate about this era is it's blurred all lines, and we're all sort of there's an acceptance of bringing your whole self and the totality of all the things on your plate, and there's no apologies for having to set boundaries or having to prioritize all the things that should be. And so that's an important part of the team culture that we're trying to build too with Bread and Butter. Is we're founder first, we're family first. We want to operate and feel like a family, and that's holistic of what's going on in everybody's lives. But it's a crazy time.
It is. And you and I were chatting about this before we jumped on, but with 3 young kids, myself at home, like that, one of the things I'm noticing is just how the day is structured so differently now, where, like you said, I heard you say you kind of jump back on later in the evening and might actually work a pretty good chunk of time after dinner. One of the questions that came in, I'm just going to grab because it fits in neatly here, that one of the attendees asked is what you're doing for self-care. Are there things that you can share with the group here and make sure that you're not burning out or that you're just taking good care of yourself?
It's a great question. I got a Fitbit again, and it's been a long time since I've used any type of tracking apps. And I, generally believe in not tracking as much, but if you're feeling healthy and you're feeling rested and you're feeling fit, that's good. But for me, this very virtual, always on Zooms all day, it's been important to remind myself, hey, you need to pencil in those windows to be active. And so I will a couple times a day try to, if it's a call that doesn't need to be done over video, we already know each other well, and I don't need to be looking at a deck or a spreadsheet, do it on the phone and go for a walk and really try to get at least an hour a day of calls done that way. The other is we have a 5-year-old yellow lab too. So he keeps us active, but when I walk him, that's my time to kind of just play roulette with my phone and dial a friend, because I never know, can't really plan that in advance. It's not a consistent time, but I'll literally call like 9 people until I reach someone, and then just have a 12-minute catch up with them, and just trying to proactively remind myself that, just try to stay connected whenever we can. But all advice is welcome from members of the audience as well.
That's great. I know we'll loop back to that. I like your roulette idea. That's a good one. How do you think that, how are you seeing this sort of time of sheltering in place affecting some of the founders that you're working with? We talked about it for you personally, but what are you seeing on the founder side? Many of the people that are on right now are founders. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that front.
Sure. I think there's a business question, and there's more of the team leadership question. So on the business side, certainly many companies that I work with are in industries that are just 100% squarely impacted by COVID. And so there we've seen a lot of just tenacity and excellent leadership in making very difficult decisions around, team and staffing and health and safety, and Do we furlough people? Do we lay them off? Do we close down temporarily or permanently? And so I think there it's getting as much feedback and advice from the true trusted stakeholders around you to make an informed decision, and then handling it as transparently and honestly as possible. But we have a number of companies, we work with who are, I think, really poised to come out well, even though they were squarely impacted by this. And one example is a company called Party Slate in Chicago. They're a phenomenal team led by Julie Novak, and they're a marketplace to connect event professionals with a variety of vendors and players in the ecosystem, 100% focused on corporate social events, weddings, obviously right in the line of fire for COVID-19. But what they've done instead is and they've been very efficient about reducing burn and thinking smartly about the business, but they've instead pivoted to thought leadership and helping people get on board with virtual events. And it's a different side of the business, but they've really positioned themselves as the thought leader and the source of truth and tools for navigating or shifting your event. And we do believe that, I believe that when we ultimately come out of this, the demand will be higher than ever for that business and those types of services. But it's a question of how do we just reposition ourselves in this time. But on a personal note, on the personal side of work, I think every leader has opportunity to, how do we elegantly shift the workforce to be fully distributed, fully at home, and accounting for their holistic life, right? Which many teams already may have been virtual or distributed, but not in all cases. And we all have the case of we have to care for family members or children or have other broader responsibilities alongside that. So I think the leaders who are just transparent, communicative, empathetic, and willing to understand that this is a very, very long game, I think it's a great time to build team culture and loyalty, despite it being some of the most difficult times we've ever seen.
That's a great answer. I am interested to hear your thoughts on how you feel like your role as an investor has maybe changed during COVID, or has it? Assumes that maybe it has, but maybe you don't feel like it has.
Well, a unique thing about, with Bread and Butter Ventures, we've remained very actively open for business and actively investing. So we're about to close our fourth new investment in the past, I think, 6 weeks this week.
Congrats.
And so thank you. We've been very, very excited by the opportunities that we've seen across the radar from all corners of the world, across all industries. And I think partially that's a function of, some venture capital is pulling back a little, others are remaining very active. But for those who are active, there's a lot of interesting opportunities to be had. So I think, if anything, the volume has increased of what we're seeing and what we're really doing a lot of work on. But more broadly, I think, the role has been just to step up more and be in touch with our companies more, not in any sort of pressure, heavy-handed way, but just to say, we're here, whether it's to help navigate in the earlier days, PPP, and connect you with some smaller banks. For example, small banks here in Minnesota were really phenomenal at processing PPP for companies who didn't even bank with them, who weren't based in our state. So figuring out those, some of those efficiencies, but more broadly, just being here and being a sounding board and being non-judgmental, being supportive and saying, just validating that we're here, we're behind you, we're behind the company, your vision, we're going to get through this. And it may mean difficult things happen in the meantime, but this is not a fair weather friendship. And so it's been great to spend, honestly, a lot more time with the founders we work with on issues big and small.
You referenced the kind of event party rental space and the founder that has made some really thoughtful shifts. I'm curious, before I ask you a question around diversity and inclusion, like any other companies that are top of mind in your portfolio or not, that you feel like have really made a savvy transition or pivot, or, could be a modest pivot, it could be a significant one, but I'm just curious who else is top of mind for you.
There's a lot of interesting companies to reference. So one is a very recent investment we just made and we just announced in a Minnesota-based company called Omnia Fishing. Omnia is basically an e-commerce platform to connect anglers with the right sort of bait and tackle products. So the vast majority of that today happens offline, in physical stores. And a couple things are happening right now with COVID-19. One is that a tremendously larger amount of people are flocking to the outdoors because and fishing is one of the few things that is permitted and we can do. But there's this huge opportunity to capture the e-commerce component. So they've built this great platform. They've indexed data nationally for over 150,000 lakes. And so it's really an interesting data play around specifying your purchasing experience based on where you're going to go. So that's been a really cool example of a company that's leaned in and done more and raised capital successfully in this environment that's not necessarily directly related to COVID in any way. So that's been one. Others, Hungry is a company based in Washington, D.C. They were recently in the New York Times in the, delivery business. Really interesting to think about companies that weren't necessarily, they just pivoted their business in this time. And they're doing really, really well. Care Academy, you may remember Adam from Google Demo Day.
Yeah.
That's a Rise the Rest investment. And I just love watching how Care Academy is a platform to train and connect home health workers. And they primarily serve the elder care population. And so in this time, they as well have really just positioned themselves as the thought leader in virtual care and caregiving and training. And the amount of growth and momentum is truly through the roof. So, and they just closed a $9 million Series A earlier this year. So we're really excited about, there's companies who can, I think, step in to help more people navigate these times, and it could be anything from fishing to healthcare.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. Those are good examples. My next question is around diversity and inclusion, and this is one I'm excited to ask you because you're someone who, in your time at Google for Startups, I think was at the forefront of pushing and leading the startup community to take a much more active role in leadership position and posture around diversity and inclusion, from the boardroom all the way through startup hiring. For those attendees who are on, when Mary was at Google for Startups, she and her team put together several initiatives that really, I think, galvanized the Tech Hub network that Google formed to find some initiatives to support, find and create new initiatives to support female founders and founders of color. I'm speaking about that personally, just my experience of getting to work with Mary on this front. And so I'd love to just hear your thoughts about that topic. Your thoughts about that from the bread and butter venture side of things. And just, I have a sort of follow-on question there about, for those who are listening in, your advice to them. Many that I talk to in the Triangle want to see the Triangle build a very diverse technology community and grow in that. And so thoughts on how we can do that well. So maybe first part is just your general thoughts on this topic, and for people to get to know kind of your thinking around diversity and inclusion, and then kind of relatedly your thoughts on what a region like ours can be doing to advance this topic.
Well, thanks for the tee up, and also for the really kind words. It was a really powerful learning experience through the work at Google. The ability for an entity like Google, or in the Triangle, it would be American Underground, to have the ability to convene and to do something that's cross network. That was the aha for me, was the power of putting out a call to action. So one of the examples that Adam was referencing, we piloted something the first year. It was called 40 Forward. It was 40 because at the time we had 40 partners, but we basically said, Google's going to allocate an additional bucket of $1 million. We already partner and sponsor and support all these organizations directly anyhow, but this is specifically for accelerating the advancement of women in our communities. So we said, if you have a proposal, could be for a new program, an event series, an accelerator, grants efforts in your community, propose to us, and we will award a bucket of this $1 million. And so we ended up having all 40 partners come forward, and the ideas that came out were phenomenal. And we tested them, and some failed, some succeeded. The important thing was we did 40 different things, and we learned and we exchanged ideas, everything from, a baby-friendly accelerator for moms to the idea of changing everything from happy hours to breakfast or lunches to, very specific. One partner, I think, had, just by announcing they were going to do a women's accelerator, they had a 25% increase in female members sign up to their space, which was sustained over a year. And so I'm a big fan of the approach of, if we can do a cross-platform or a convening type of thing, that's really powerful. But I think in today's environment, and I am coming to you from Minneapolis, of course, it couldn't be more top of mind, and it couldn't be more urgent to talk openly about, diversity, equity, inclusion across the board. When we think about it today from the bread and butter lens, and that's both through venture and working with startups, I think about it as, how do we transform or try to create change at every layer in the stack? So one is for venture funds, when we have the opportunity to raise capital from limited partners or LPs, how do we think about who's investing in us? Because ultimately that's who we're trying to return money to. How do you ensure diversity in that base? And it's typically a very, very closed network, high barrier to entry. So are there creative ways to think about sourcing, education, bringing in more people in as LPs? Then when you have a fund, you typically have general partners, GPs, or the investment team. How do you ensure that that team is diverse? And there's many ways. It's very unclear what the path is to venture capital. I think you can, everybody will ask has a different way of how they stumbled into it. But a lot of them are operators who have operational experience building and scaling companies or teams. Others have, deep sector expertise. Others maybe came up in finance, and there's all these ways. So how do you recruit and invest in fund managers and investors who look like you, or who look like other, not just your typical run of the mill? Granted, remember, I went from tech to finance, so you can imagine what that landscape looks like. Then once you're the investor, how do we think about sourcing the right pipeline? And I love venture capital, and I hate that it is such a network driven industry and business. And our team's trying to do it differently, right? It's all about the warm intro. Yes, we see a lot of inbound referrals, and we appreciate them all, but we're also trying to do it differently. So our team, each member of our team does open office hours every week, and any company anywhere can sign up to talk to us about anything. You can pitch us a company, you can ask us advice on college applications, anything you want, but sort of demystifying this, I can't find your name, I can't find your email address, being much more open. I also think if you hire a diverse team, you naturally start to see, I've lived this experience, you start to see more diverse deal flow, because guess what? It's a signal that you're open to communities of color and to women. I can't tell you how many amazing female entrepreneurs I've met with and have said, you're the first female investor I've pitched, and I love that I don't have to explain to you why female health is a huge market and why XYZ are huge problems within it. And so there's that. And once we get the portfolio companies into the fold, how do we help them with training and resources to not just recruit and hire, but then retain and support a diverse workforce? And think about, for founders in the room, that's including, who's on your cap table, who's on your board. And we have done a lot of work to try to think about how to source a deep bench of really qualified candidates, so that when we work with companies who need a board member, for example, we can help place, suggest, nominate, because usually it's the friend of a friend or the person who wrote the biggest check into my round. And so I think it's all of those layers. If I look at the ecosystem holistically, and there's so much to unpack in every single one of those verticals, but I'm really hopeful that, the solution lies across all of those. And I will say that, what we experienced with George Floyd's murder, Memorial Day weekend, one of the things that I feel optimistic and hopeful about is that these conversations that have transpired, and the anger and the calls to action, they seem to be much more sustained than I've experienced in my career to date. And so I'm hopeful that this can be the moment, if we all work together, that things really do change. And I'm committed to being a part of the solution in any way I can. And our firm, we published on our launch day our diversity commitments as well. And you can find them on our Medium page, but I think it's publicly publishing how we're doing every year, so that everybody can hold us accountable, but humbly knowing, we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate, and a couple of people have chimed in on the chat here, how much they appreciate your thoughts on this. I think the thing that stands out to me is just the breadth and depth of your thinking on this, that, like you said, you're thinking about it at all levels, sort of across the stack, and both from who you're raising money from and then down into the companies that you're working with, is really cool and admirable. And also you answered a question that somebody was asking about how you're sourcing companies at Bread and Butter. So it's cool to hear that you're doing the office hours is one way that people in our region maybe can reach out to you if they're in a a vertical that makes sense to be able to chat with you further. So for those of you who are on, take advantage of that in the coming weeks and months. Mary, I'm for sake of time, I'm going to speed up here a little bit. I feel like I could chat with you all day, and I know our attendees have a lot of questions. So I'm curious if there's a piece of advice right now that you're talking to some of your portfolio companies about that you'd be willing to share with some of the people who are on the chat today.
Sure. Well, I think a general piece of advice is this is the best time to be over communicating as a leader or to your investors or whomever your stakeholders are. We really appreciate, I think transparency is the best possible thing. And even if the answer is, I don't have the answer right now, but here's how I'm thinking about it. And that goes for, managing a team in an uncertain time, just checking in or periodically having those town halls or all hands where people have a chance to voice questions and concerns. We saw that early on when there were a lot of questions about, everything. Are we going to go back into the office, or are people going to get laid off, or are we losing XYZ big client? So I think, organized, periodic, but regular communication is really important. And then for investors as well, helpful to communicate to your broader stakeholders and team, but specifically to help them help you. So it's, if you have, here's the high level update, but then here's 3 things that I would love help with. People love to at least feel like they're trying to be helpful, right? So if you can actually organize that and have a call to action of, hey, here's 5 customers that I'm really trying to reach, or does anybody know X investor at Y firm trying to get an intro? People love to hear from you during this time in particular, I think. So just, I think, over communicating in a really organized way.
Thank you. What are your thoughts for the kind of ecosystem partners that are on the chat today? Are there things that you think that we can be doing during this time to support entrepreneurs or business leaders, investors, policymakers?
It's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things is exactly what you're doing right now, right? Is trying to still find ways to drive that connectivity in that community, even when we can't all physically be together. And I love what you're doing, Adam, with the Luminary Series. I'm honored to be a part of it. With, Silicon North Star is my nonprofit. We've taken a similar approach of, we're a Minnesota-based program to help underserved kids in Minnesota. But with this time, it's horrible we can't all be together. But what we're doing is leveraging that to bring in speakers from outside our community who we wouldn't otherwise be able to access. So I was worried up front that, everyone was going to get virtual fatigue or, video conference fatigue, but it hasn't been the case. I mean, I'm so thrilled that, so many people have tuned in today, and that's been my experience consistently for the past several months of organizing things or participating in things. And so I think continuing to do that is one of the biggest values, because it is actually a very lonely, vulnerable time. And to still feel that sense of, I'm a part of this community, my community leaders care about me, they're still trying to nurture and provide, value for me. That goes a long way.
Great. One question that came through on Q&A that I want to pick up before we do sort of a lightning round, and just for everybody who's listening, and please add your questions, and Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second, but one that came through was just about your sweet spot on check sizes and traction for bread and butter portfolio companies. Where are you sort of on the spectrum or continuum of that?
Sure. So we primarily focus on seed stage, but we look at sort of pre-seed seed, I would say. And that's a big asterisk, because I feel like every market you go to, seed means something else, something different. So it could be anything from, typically the rounds that I'm seeing right now are between a $1 and $3 to $4 million total raise.
Okay.
But there are definitely variations within that. So adjusted for the size of the round, our checks are, the initial investment can be anywhere from $200K to $500K. We are all about reserving capital for follow-on investments into additional rounds. And one of the things I'm most excited about is, so Stephanie Rich has joined our team full-time as our head of platform. And this idea of platform to us means, two things. One, how do we support our companies post-investment? And that's building that connective tissue that I talked about into industry. So, if we're supporting a company in the food tech space, could we help connect them into, General Mills, Cargill, Ecolab? These are all in Minnesota. If it's a healthcare company, so on and so forth. But also it's about how do we engage with our community here in the Twin Cities and help bring everybody along together. And so I think at the seed stage, that's kind of a differentiator that I'm excited about, where platform is a very increasingly popular concept in venture, but I think at this earliest stage, it could be really magical.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious. Well, I'll stop. Let me keep going on a couple more questions. What's one of the things that you miss most while being home?
I derive a lot of energy from being around other people. I really love that really drives me, and so. And that's okay to some extent virtually. I've been very used to working in distributed teams, starting at Google. Then when I was at Rise and Rest, I was in Minnesota. The rest of the team was in Washington, D.C. So I felt like I had that down. The degree to which I definitely miss direct human interaction, with others in a work context and a personal level, that's been really sad. And of course, my dad is retired in San Diego, and I don't know when the next time we'll be able to see each other is. And so I know that's something that so many people on this call probably everybody can relate to. So, but definitely I'm a fan of the in-person.
It's good. What's been a pleasant surprise maybe during this time?
Well, I think we're very fortunate, that our industries are able to basically fully operate at full steam virtually. So as opposed to many, so I think the degree to which it's been relatively uninterrupted, and if anything, more productive in some ways, has been a big surprise. And then the silver lining has definitely been, more time with my family, which adds to the craziness of every day. But it's a really special. I try to remind myself in moments of insanity that this is a special window to be able to get this much time, and so to try to be mindful and present. Then I'll catch up later that night, kind of thing, versus trying to split my attention in 5 places unproductively.
That's great. That's well said. One thing that I've started doing is when I'm with my kids, putting my phone in a different part of the house, because it's just too easy for me to pick it up and check something. And, our kids are observant. They notice that when mom or dad is a little bit distracted because they're sending even just a quick text back to somebody, that can over time be a lot. So that's great.
I don't want them I don't want to be known for that. I did the other day, my daughter said, can I watch another show, mommy? Because you have your phone. Right. And she's 3. And I felt really bad. And to your point, I'm like, they're picking up on everything.
Yep. Absolutely. This is a bad question after what we just talked about, but is there a show, movie, or book that you've enjoyed most during this stretch that you'd recommend?
Yes. One of the series that we just finished, my husband and I, he also has a ton on his plate right now. Professionally, we will watch like 15 minutes of TV every now and then we can. So it took us a long time, but we just finished watching The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary, which was phenomenal. My parents, I mentioned they immigrated from Thailand. So they met and got married in Chicago and lived there for many years. So growing up, even though I grew up in California, we were all diehard Bulls fans. And I was still relatively young-ish during the glory days. So I didn't realize any of the broader context. It was really cool. But also just going through these times, admiring any craft at its truly most excellent form, it made me want to be, more physically fit, a better investor. It was very motivating.
Yeah. Well, and
How about you?
That's good. No, you're hitting the sweet spot for all the Tar Heel fans that are on the chat right now with Michael Jordan's ties to UNC.
That's right.
Yeah, the beginning of that is amazing. One final question before we do chat, and Gary, I'll throw it to you. Do you have a prediction on a way our world will be permanently changed coming out of COVID?
I do, and I think that actually maps back 100% to our fun thesis of bread and butter. But it really is. I really think that COVID-19 has transformed the way we think about how we feed each other, how we take care of each other, and how we work ultimately. And we're not like a COVID fund, right? But we were launching, I think in a perfect time, because we know that we can never afford to underinvest in these sectors. And so I really do think this has exposed extreme vulnerabilities in not just nationally, but globally, the infrastructure around supply chain, and it's exacerbated the inequities across the board that exist as well. So I think hopefully there's a consciousness and awareness and desire to run full force towards investing in some of these riskier solutions that could really be transformative. But so yes, I think that we'll never go back to being the same.
That's great. Thank you. Gary, do you want to take a couple of these questions in Q&A, and maybe we start with the one about transportation?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So Mary, we have about 4 questions so far in the chat. I'm going to start with the first one. What do you think of the future of the transportation industry in the U.S. and globally?
Ooh, I know how to even begin thinking about that. I think that it's going to require significant government intervention to even, begin to think about digging out from the crisis for the existing incumbents. But I am curious what innovations come out of it. Right? I was hearing about a couple companies one was literally trying to do flying railroad cars. I just think, how can smaller early stage startups rather think about maybe rewriting some of that. But I do wonder if the sustained impact of us being so virtual and actually being productive, been in many a board conversation where it's been like, this meeting was so productive over Zoom, and it was 2.5 hours instead of a full day, and we had to fly there. So we'll just do all of our board meetings virtually from now on. And I don't know if that will indeed be the case or not, but I do predict a significant reduction in business travel, not 100% to a halt, but I think it's going to really drive the question of what's absolutely necessary and essential versus what's nice to have. And I think it's going to be really, really difficult for the big transportation industry for sure.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you for your answer there. I have another one for you. What's your best advice for project planning and also meeting deadlines?
Project planning. So I'll go back to probably the framework that I grew up in, which Adam's going to know what I'm going to say, but that's the OKR framework, which stands for objectives and key results. This was a framework that Google used, but probably thousands or millions of companies at this point use them. But the idea is that for planning, either for individual, or it could be at a team level, or it could be at a company level, the idea of creating what's the objective, and then what's the key results that we hope to see from that. And if you set those OKRs, we call them, at an annual level and then a quarterly level, and then you measure them and share them out. If and when I have the opportunity to run a large team again someday, I 100% will go back to that. And even for myself, I try to meticulously measure and track, because I am curious, like even the basic stuff that gets slipped through the cracks of how many investments opportunities did I look at in X sector over this period of time, and what were some of the trends. So I'm a big fan of kind of looking down the road, setting some deadlines, putting them on calendar, reminding myself, checking in with people along the way. But yeah, OKRs is the framework that I've lived and died by for almost 20 years.
Gary's video is off, but he's probably either nodding his head or cringing because we use him on the AU team.
Yeah, we do check-ins weekly with our OKRs, and it's probably one of the best things we could have done since COVID. So I would highly recommend that practice. So I have another question. What are some cool innovations you've seen in the food industry? Anything you wish would be innovated or have a good market for?
There's a lot of interesting stuff happening right now. And first, I want to shout out our portfolio company from the Triangle, Induction Food Systems. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. But I think that I'm really interested in kind of the supply chain right now, which I think, again, COVID-19 exposed a lot of vulnerability in there. But as far as there's a lot of very manual processes today. Once you start to really look at it, you would be floored by the manual nature of a lot of the way that the food delivery system works today. So wherever we can create technology innovations that make that much more efficient, I think those are potential game changers. There's a lot of excitement right now around alternative proteins, alternative meats, alternative non-dairy products. So food itself is a whole other sector. We at Bread and Butter, when we say food tech, we're more focused on the tech side of it, or the not as much consumer packaged goods or CPG products themselves. But it's a wildly interesting space right now.
Gary, I think we got time for one more. Do you want to do Deshaun's question and then we'll wrap?
Yep. Last question. What's your thoughts on the future of workspace post COVID-19?
Great question. It's a great question. And, I hugely was a huge fan of the very collaborative, open style workspaces. I worked at Google for 15 years. Even our VPs had cubes, right? It was all about open access. And that was kind of the holy grail of how I grew up working. Most recently, I've been working in a co-working space for the last couple of years here. And now we've just launched a team of fund virtually. And we've been 100% virtual with a rare exception here or there. And so it's hard for me to think about what does a return to quote unquote normal look like. I think it's going to be dramatically different. I think it's going to be rotational, potentially if people go back in, and maybe not just for the short haul either. I think that people are finding, the stress, alleviating the stress of not having to commute anymore, having more time at the bookends for the totality of your life outside of work. It's a real advantage. And I think it's going to be hard to go back to 100% the way things were. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some dramatic changes, and yes, people will return to offices, but the layouts may be different, maybe more protected. They may be spaced out or staggered. Maybe we come back half the week each and rotate. So I think there's a lot of creative ways, but I firmly believe that we think about the future of workplace. A workplace to me represents, the people and the culture that rally around that team. And so it isn't even physical. So I'm confident that companies with the right values and leadership will succeed no matter what happens as far as the physical structures around them.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Gary, for jumping in. Mary, it's always just a pleasure to be with you. And from all of us who've been on with you, thanks for giving us an hour of your day and so much wisdom and thoughts on all of this. Thank you.
That was really my pleasure. And I'm excited to, be re-engaged with the community there. And if there's anything that I can do to be helpful, and of course, would love to invest in more great companies there. So we'll definitely, we'll stay in touch.
That'd be great. Everyone, please do check out Bread and Butter Ventures. You can see their Medium posts. We'll email this out along with the video once we wrap. And I just want to, again, thank our partners in putting this together, HQ Raleigh, the Entrepreneurship Center at Kenan-Flagler, Duke University, North Carolina Central University, and North Carolina State University. Y'all, we're planning to be back next month. You're going to find out a little more about who will be our next speaker for the Luminary Talks series. And until then, hope everybody stays safe and healthy. And Mary, our thanks once again.
Thank you so much, Adam. Take care, everybody.